Our other big story, the Fed's uncovering a $50 billion Ponzi scheme. The SEC accusing Bernard Madoff and his investment firm with securities fraud. Our Charlie Gasparino is on the phone with the latest. We're trying to figure out, Charlie, I don't know if you can answer this, but he had $17 billion under management. How do we get up to that 50? We like big numbers, obviously.
They try to inflate these numbers all the time. No, this is really 50 because he used incredible amounts of leverage here.
Okay,
I mean, the numbers were completely levered. And, you know, this is an amazing story. I mean, listen, I knew Bernie Madoff, and I knew him because, you know, when I covered the Grasso story, Bernie Madoff helped found the NASDAQ stock market. I mean, this guy was an amazing figure. For this to happen right now is totally off the charts. I'll tell you, if the market is down this morning, it's because of selling, because this thing is incredibly levered, this whole investment thing that he did. And, you know, listen, when I knew him, he's a nice guy. You never know guys are crooks. Yeah. But I'll tell you, if this thing is true, this is probably the biggest Ponzi scheme ever maybe in the history. This is bigger than Ivan Boesky. I mean, this is an amazing story. And that's if it's true. And you know, you preface that because this is so big, if it's real, that it's bigger than anything we've ever seen, and it's leveraged. And you know, when we say 50, listen, if it was 17 billion, it'd be huge. But this is an incredibly leveraged story. And you know, here's the thing, and I'll tell you, and we say if it's true, this thing could have been caught. The SEC had knowledge of this a couple of years ago. There were letters that were delivered to the SEC about this guy's performance. And here's the thing. This guy, and this is why others there was some suspicion here, incredibly smooth return over a long period of time, and that just never happened.
Charlie, explain how authorities think he did it. What exactly was he doing? How is it working?
Well, here's the thing. Carl, is that you?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's the crazy thing here. They didn't figure this out until now. I mean, when was the last time you've heard listen, I don't invest in hedge funds. I'm not rich enough. But think about it this way: you say you purport a kind of a risky strategy, which he did. It was something called the single strike option. I can't even remember exactly what it was, but it was some sort of way that he traded around the options expiring period. Right? It's an incredibly volatile way of trading.
Right.
Let's just say you did that. Right. And you reported every year 8% returns. It would be suspicious, right?
Right. It would start to look like China with their GDP numbers.
Right. It would look like you were cooking the books. Now, I have a source. A friend of mine runs a firm called Axia. It does due diligence on hedge funds. About 18 months ago, he had a client that was thinking about, a very large pension fund client that was thinking about investing in Bernie's fund. And so he went into it. He just started investigating exactly what was going on here. And that was one of the red flags. This guy's named Jake Winthrop. Jake looked at this whole thing, and he said, well, okay, he's had 8% returns for the last 10, 15 years at this very risky strategy. Then he looked a little further, and he said, let me take a look at who's looking at the books. Well, guess what? Bernie had one guy up in Muncie, New York, who was basically his auditor. One guy in a very small office.
Right.
There was tons of red flags here with this guy. Listen, that doesn't mean there's fraud. Those were red flags, and he didn't know this was the next Enron, but he thought it was crazy for his client to be involved in this thing.
Right. But authorities think it was those new investors like that were creating the quote returns, quote unquote, for the guys who were already in.
Well, that's the whole thing.
The definition of a Ponzi.
In order for something like this to blow up, you need huge redemptions. And we have the condition right now where even the best fund managers, right, the best hedge fund managers, the John Paulsons, the guys that have returned big bucks, the guys this year who are, instead of down 30%, they're down they're flat, who are getting redemptions. You need that sort of situation where you have a Ponzi scheme that's being exposed. And that's what we have right now. Ponzi schemes get exposed because you have huge redemptions. And that's what you have right now. And that's why this guy was exposed. But this thing was going on I'll tell you, it was probably going on for the last 10 years, if you
Charlie,
look at the numbers.
Dennis Gartman was here this morning, and he said the question this raises is the question of cockroaches. When you see one, there are more out there. Does that create investor unease? What do you think about that?
But that's the problem here. If a Bernie Madoff, and that's why the market is probably going to be off tomorrow. If you have a Bernie Madoff, a guy that's, listen, this guy was a very trusted guy. I mean, if anybody that knows him knows Bernie Madoff was a decent guy. If you have a Bernie Madoff who's essentially a fraud, well, then people are now figuring out, well, then you know, what can you trust? I'll tell you, this you guys don't understand. This guy was an incredibly trusted guy in the investment community, and you know, he was a decent guy. If you knew him, listen, I spent like 2 hours with him, not because he liked me. He was a
obviously.
decent, well, thank you. But he was a decent guy. He was a guy that wanted to sit there and talk to you about, I mean, I asked him about the start of the NASDAQ stock market. And, I mean, he spent an enormous amount of time with me just for the hell of it and just to explain things to me. And everything he told me essentially panned out. You know, this guy didn't lie. This is a huge story, and it's really hard to really pin down exactly what it's going to mean today, because I'll tell you, there are fund of funds. I think just about every fund of fund that I know had something to do with Bernie Madoff, and that's what's scary about this. And what's also scary about this is the leverage. I mean, he had 17 billion, but this thing was levered to a point where it was like 50 billion, and it does erode the confidence in the market.
Yeah, it sure does. It's an amazing story. We'll get more on it later with you, Charlie. But
okay.
Man, incredible. Charlie Gasparino there on the Newsline.